Hello, my name is Rosalie Rippey, and I'm from the Massachusetts Federation for Children with Special Needs. And I'm introducing our presentation today, Career and Vocational Decision Making, How Cultural Brokers Can Help. And I'm joined in this presentation by Olga Lopez from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and by Aceriane Leal from the Federation for Children with Special Needs. Before we begin, I am going to read this disclaimer. The contents of this presentation were developed by the presenters for the 2022 OSIP conference. However, these contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. So I'm going to begin by providing an overview of career and technical education during the transition year. Transition planning is defined in IDEA, and it is defined as a required activity that needs to take place in the school year when a student is about to turn 16 years old. In Massachusetts, transition planning is required to begin during the school year when the student turns 14. And it's also stated that it should begin earlier if that's appropriate. What's important to know about transition services is that it's supposed to be a coordinated set of activities that help prepare students for their future. And among the things that it needs to focus on are employment and other post-adult living objectives. It can be a really helpful thing for families to really start thinking about transition during the middle school years. And that's regardless of whether they are required to do that in the IEP process or not. That's because where a student goes to high school has a big impact on what happens after high school. So whether that transition process is happening formally through an IEP and it's focused on defining the specialized services and placements and supports that the student will receive, there's already going to be work that families are going to have to do to think about what is the best high school for their child. So if a student is not going to be going to a specialized special education school, then there's an array of options in nearly every community. It could include their regular local public high school, or it could include things like charter school or a private school, virtual schooling, homeschooling, and then career and technical education. Career and technical education is offered all across the country through a federal law known as the Perkins Act. These programs focus on preparing students for their post-high school future. So this is obviously something that could have a real advantage for a student with disabilities. And in fact, students with disabilities are often well represented in technical training programs and vocational schools. This might be partly because the learning in these programs is really hands-on. This can be a great fit for students with disabilities. We know from research that in general, students have much better outcomes when they graduate from a CTE school. They are consistently going to be more likely to finish their high school degree, attend college, maintain full-time employment, and earn higher salaries compared to folks who don't graduate from CTE schools and programs. And as public schools, these programs are all legally required to provide accommodations and supports to both English language learners and students with disabilities. Unfortunately, we know that Latinos, Asians, and English language learners with and without disabilities are very underrepresented in CTE schools. And both students of color and students with disabilities are underrepresented in the highest paid fields, including the STEM, or the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. So we know that although students with disabilities in general may access these programs, students with disabilities who are also English learners or have a family that is a bilingual family are less likely to attend these programs, both in Massachusetts and nationwide. So the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education decided to partner with the Federation for Children with Special Needs to try to figure out whether part of the reason for that might have to do with whether families were able to access the information that they would need to attend one of these programs and to send their child to one of these programs. We sort of framed our questions in 3 key areas. We wanted to know whether language diverse families know about all of their options for high school, including career and technical education. We wanted to know what is it that they would need to know to decide to choose CTE for their child, and then what's the best way to reach them? What outreach strategies would work the best? And then we decided to find the answer to these questions by talking with families themselves and getting their insights and guidance into this question. So before I tell you about what we learned from our statewide family engagement project on this topic, I want to invite our next speaker, Olga Lopez, to talk with us about the Massachusetts statewide family engagement framework, because we think that will be a tool and resource that will be very helpful to you in thinking about your family engagement efforts.
Thanks, Rosalie. Good evening, everyone. My name is Olga Lopez. I am the Family Engagement Specialist at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE. Previous to my work at DESE, I am a former special education bilingual teacher, and I was part also of the Federation for Children with Special Needs team as the Latino Outreach Coordinator. So what we're going to do today is we are going to deep and dive in our family engagement framework that we developed here in Massachusetts. But first, I would like just to provide some research-based information, about why family engagement is so important right now. Quality family engagement can have a lasting effects on a child's social, emotional, and physical health, school readiness, and academic achievement. Engaging families has always been a critical component of your work, and as we find ourselves in multiple struggles, pre and post pandemic, and struggle with the racial justice. Family engagement is as important now as it ever was, arguably more important, and will continue to be important well beyond the pandemic. The family engagement that we are going to talk about here is a little bit different from the past, where we use terms like parent involvement. So, and I would like to give you just 2 briefly examples. First, family engagement responds to a shift from parent to family, an important acknowledgement of the diverse structure of families and the importance of honoring the family's members who may be involved in a child's life. Our framework has a very broad and open definition of family to recognize the diverse family structure that children are part of. And another second difference that is the shift from involvement to engage highlights the recognition that family engagement is something that we do to families, but something that we do with families, a relation that we establish with families that exists in an ongoing collaboratively way, no one way or one time arrangement. That's why this is our framework. The family engagement is so important. Next slide, please. So our framework was developed in collaboration with 11 state agencies that include the education and health and human services. DESE, during the 3 years, for 3 years, we host different regional coalitions that include families and youth across the health and human service, because we want to listen, we want to hear the input about how can we develop, what are the challenges that the communities are facing to engage with practitioners in the school districts. And the goal of our family engagement framework is to create a roadmap to engage families, which builds on existing family engagement frameworks, integrate principles of equity and cultural responsiveness, and provides an aligned approach to engage with families. So our framework consists of multiple sections that include our guiding principle overarching 4 elements that provide the backbone for this framework. These elements translate the concept outlined in the guided principles into practices. We have one session on transition we are focused on the transition that families experience and seeks to guide practitioners using the family engagement framework elements as they assist families to navigate those transitions. And the last session is focused on strengthening the family engagement capacity of the organization as a whole. And we would like just to go very briefly to talk about our guiding principles. Our first guiding principle, each family is unique and all families represent diverse structure. So family engagement includes an authentic effort to understand each family's beliefs, values, priorities, goals, and aspirations. Families and practitioners make an joint decision and share responsibility in a successful partnership. Our second guiding principle, diversity is expressed and experienced at multiple levels. We want to acknowledge and accepting the need to engage all families is essential for successful engagement of diverse families and includes and recognize the strength that comes from the diverse backgrounds. Building a respectful, trusting, and reciprocal relationship is a shared responsibility of families, practitioners, organizations, and the system. This positive relationship has the individual family's strength and assets at its center. Families are the child's first and best advocates. This premier role puts families in a unique position to nurture the children's growth and development and to help practitioners to become more knowledgeable about their child. And our last guiding principle, equity, is the eradication of privilege, oppression, disparities, and disadvantage. Family engagement must be equitable. And when we talk about equitable family engagement, it's about meeting individual families, whatever they are, and providing them what they need to engage. Is this about provide opportunities for engaging that can help family members to become more effective advocates for the child, for the children. So our framework elements, these elements provide the backbone of the framework. Each element builds on the one before. These elements translate the concept outlining the guiding principles into practice. So our first element is building positive relationship with our family. Mutual trust and respect lies on the core of this relation. If we really haven't built trusting relationship with families, the rest of what we do around family engagement will be less effective and less impactful. Family engagement in relationship has to be intentionally built and sustain relationship with all families, build a reciprocal and balanced communication with families, and collaborate with families to create and promote connection among other families. Promoting family well-being. So our framework speaks to the importance foundation for work of supporting family well-being. When families struggle to provide and address for these basic needs, they will be most certainly struggle to engage with us. This is not a reflection of their commitment to their child's learning. Instead, it's a reflection of the need to prioritize the security, stability, and well-being of the family unit. Promoting pathways for partnership with families. It's much the same way that we seek to, when we are develop individualized instruction with our students, when we think on our specific goals for our students when they have an IEP, it's the same way. When we want to engage family, we should use different strategies to engage with them. Each family is unique, and we should find different approaches depends on the family's connection or relationship or culture. So that's when we say the promoting pathways for partnership with families, identifying and planning engagement activities, use family-driven approaches to create various opportunities for engagement, provide opportunities for family contributions to the engagement process, provide opportunities for family mentorship and voice, share power and decision making. Our next guiding element is supporting child, youth, and development learning, health, and well-being. Is when we develop a multi-response system of information exchange among families, schools, and community organizations, and identify collaborative development and learning opportunities among families, schools, and community organizations. Engaging families to the peer-to-peer interaction. And I would like to pass it to my colleague Aceriane Leal, who's going to talk about the cultural broken mom.
Engaging with language and culturally diverse families. How do you apply these ideas to working with families whose first language is not English? You might have said translation. And yes, translation is the written portion and interpretation is the oral version. And both of them are important to be done by a licensed professional human being, especially for important meetings and formal documents, such as IEPs, 504s, disciplinary issues, evaluations, parent handbook, presentation on legal rights, and so on. So electronic translation should not be used for documents. They relies on the artificial intelligence, and you have to be careful because the quality is low, and this translation can be too literal or simply incorrect. We talk about, translation and interpretation being the, very important ingredients for communicating information to families. However, if you are concerned about hearing from them and about building partnership over time, they are not enough. As you see on the iceberg, translation and interpretation only provides the surface level meaning. We have to watch to not make assumptions about what's going on under the surface. And to truly understand one another, we need to go deeper. And that takes time, listening, and trust. So when working with the language diverse families, translation and interpretation is required, but it's not enough on its own. We want communication to be reciprocal for families to truly understand, and we want to provide opportunity for parent voice, and so we can learn from them. And for this to happen, the information has to be relevant to them. They need to understand the larger system or context. They need to trust the information source, and they need to feel they're being listened to. You might ask, how do I go deeper? So to build a relationship and deepen understanding, organization must turn to people who can serve as their link to their community, like hiring bilingual staff or, cultural brokers or cultural ambassadors, which are going to be talking about the difference between the two of them. So bilingual staff, they can provide reliable consistent cultural response in-house expertise. One thing to watch for, that immigrant communities are diverse and one person cannot represent all perspectives. That's why it's so important to recruit more voices and leaders from the community that you serve. You might ask, Aceriane, what is the research behind this model? And we have two cited here on the slide, and you're gonna find them on the handout as well. So cultural brokers act as bridges, linking schools, organizations, and diverse families to educate families in support of the organization goals, connect families to resource and information, advocating with families and the organization to promote change or decrease conflict. So both ways. As promised, we sometimes use cultural broker or culture ambassadors interchangeably, but we think of this as different things. So cultural broker already exists. They are leaders in the community and are already seeking to break new ground, resolve conflict, or find a new way of working together. Culture ambassadors are people who you recruit as volunteers or hire to help you communicate in a more culturally sensitive ways and to be a link between your organization and the community. The culture ambassador may also be a cultural broker. Bilingual members may be cultural brokers, or they can be well positioned to make connection with brokers from the community. This approach can provide great results and create meaningful relationships forged over time. But there are some pitfalls to be mindful of, like diversity. So like we talked before, be careful to not rely on just one person to represent, the perspectives or the concerns from their whole community. Instead, engage them in thinking about how to involve and include even more people. Privacy. Families don't always appreciate when you share their information with another parent from the community. Boundaries. So when you do meet with them, make sure that it's time limited. Tell them what are you going to do with the information, why you're asking, and how it's going to be used. Otherwise, asking too much can lead them to feeling overwhelmed or, just instead of building trust, they might walk away from you. So as an outcome of this approach, this model, culture ambassadors can open the door for building relationship and trust with their community. They can share the expert knowledge of their community with you. Their role offers a rewarding leadership opportunity for them, provides opportunities to demonstrate transparency and build trust. Families will likely feel most comfortable coming to the cultural broker with more questions, promoting more, building the relationship with the community. Thank you.
So now for our final section of this presentation, I'm going to talk more about what we learned when we reached out to families across the state of Massachusetts and asked them to tell us how we could do a better job of hearing from them, meeting their informational needs, and helping them make decisions about high school for their child. So to find this out, we decided to hire cultural ambassadors from around the state of Massachusetts and from multiple language groups to help us hear from a diverse cross-section of families. And so we hired speakers of English, Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian, Creole, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Arabic. And we paid them a stipend. We paid them for their time. And we asked them to conduct outreach to families and to host focus groups with us. We wrote the scripts for the focus groups with their input. We collaborated on developing slide decks and training information. And then we also just offered ongoing support, supervision to help make sure that they felt comfortable and successful and well-equipped to go about conducting this outreach for us and this information gathering. Then we gathered all of the information that we heard in these focus groups. Each focus group was held in its own language. So there was a Spanish speaking group, a Portuguese only group, and then we translated what families told us and we reported it back to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. And then we used what we learned to develop some resources that are now being used in Massachusetts to conduct outreach to language diverse families. An important thing that we learned from this process was that, in fact, yes, we were seeing an information gap. I have a graph here on the screen that shows the results from a statewide survey and our first round of 10 different focus groups held in all those different languages, where we asked families on a scale of 0 to 5, how much do you know about career, vocational, and technical education? And we found that twice as many speakers of other languages said that they knew nothing, absolutely nothing about career and technical education as their English-speaking counterparts. So in fact, over 40, about 45% of families said they knew zero about these programs. By comparison, English speakers were much more likely to have at least some knowledge, and they were more likely to have a lot of knowledge about career and technical education. There were other things that we learned from families. For instance, we learned that when schools and statewide programs don't translate our information, families assume that the program must not be for them. They assume that a student must need to speak English in order to participate in that program, even though in fact, schools are required to provide English language learners with accommodations and support until they develop their English language skills. Families also use their knowledge that they gained back in their country of origin to sort of make decisions about whether CTE would be right for them. And so many of them assumed that they were programs that were for students who were never going to go to college, or they assumed that they were for students who maybe weren't as good at school. And in fact, CTE schools today are very competitive and often are a stepping stone to competitive colleges and universities. So families were surprised to learn that and were glad to know that this was an option. Some cultural groups also expressed a preference for different ways of providing the information. And so for some cultural groups, websites they said were just not the best way to communicate with them. And they wanted things like written handouts, and they also wanted to be able to have conversations. And in fact, all language groups stated that they would appreciate and value the opportunity to talk with somebody, ask their questions, and discuss their particular situation and student before they make a decision. So as I mentioned, we used what we heard from families to tailor some new resources, including both online and printed resources that can be used in outreach to diverse families. This is a screenshot from the DESE website, where we answer some of the most common questions that we heard in our focus groups. And so one of the biggest questions was, is there a cost for these schools? There was an assumption that there'd be some sort of tuition. So we wanted to make it very clear that this is part of the public school system. Anyone can attend. It's open to all students, including students from immigrant backgrounds, English language learners, and students with disabilities. And as you can see from that red arrow on the screen, these resources are all translated, and we did not use a computer translated system. The website is available in multiple languages, but it's been translated by human translators who made sure that we have a consistent vocabulary for talking about these programs. And as you can see, there's also a link to being able to look up where your closest program is. And that is an initiative that DESE had created before they started working with us. But we, after some working with families, realized it's not enough to just look it up. You have to also understand what are the benefits and what is the structure of these programs so that you can have a context for that information. Finally, DESE really heard loud and clear that some families don't find written information to be the best way to process what these options are that are available. And so this year, they are in the process of securing a partner to create a multilingual phone line where families can speak to somebody in their own language and get help and information about what their specific options and resources are. And so this time next year, that hotline should be available to families in Massachusetts. And we're looking forward to families being able to have that customized information at their fingertips through a simple phone call. I want to thank you on behalf of my presentation partners, Olga and Aceriane. It's been a pleasure to prepare this presentation for you. And if you have any questions, our information is included in the handouts, and I hope you'll reach out to us. And again, the contents of this presentation were developed by the presenters for the 2022 OSIP conference. These contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Again, thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.